Small crowd, but we're going to be very interactive today. Part of what I want to accomplish for you or with you is to encourage you to be very good about how you share your story. No matter what that audience is, no matter what the circumstance is, I want to give you some pointers to help you with that. As I mentioned before, I'm from the Portland area. My name is Dean Suhr, and I am the president and co-founder of another rare disease organization, completely unaffiliated with the Narcolepsy Network. And we'll talk about that in actually a couple of minutes, because I'm going to give you my heritage. But I do come from the rare disease community, and I sat in on your keynote this morning. It was very interesting. Of course, your chemistry is all different, so that whole process and how you're going through the research and the science and the practical care and the clinics and all that is very, very familiar to me. So I'm happy to be here and happy to engage on this topic. We're going to be talking about creating an elevator pitch, and we'll describe what that is in just a second. So this is going to no longer working. I always check things before we start. Sometimes it's not so good. All right, I'm going to have to come back here to advance things. So what is the theme of your conference today, this weekend? Remember? Besides getting together, getting to know people and learning, that's what you're doing here. But what's your theme? It's right up at the top. It says creating a path to understanding. And the part of creating a path to understanding we're going to address today is how you're helping other people understand narcolepsy, how it affects you, how it might affect them, and so on. So that's what we're going to focus in on today. I am not a wizard in narcolepsy. As I mentioned, it's another rare disease, but there are 7,000 rare diseases, a lot of different diseases, and I'm familiar with the name and a little bit of overview of that. So I did a little bit of work, and I went and Googled what is narcolepsy, and a lot of reputable sources came up here, including the Narcolepsy Network, and kind of down near the bottom there. But the NIH and Mayo Clinic and so on gave me at least a kind of a quasi-scientific and clinical definition what narcolepsy is. I have met and worked with some policy people back in DC that do have narcolepsy, not in the narcolepsy space, but in the rare disease space. So I've had some contact. But what I'd like to tell you, and this is probably not news to you, is that what the public knows about narcolepsy probably comes from Hollywood, probably comes from the TV networks. It's the extreme end of your condition. I guess for better or worse, nobody knows what NLD is, metachromatic leukodystrophy, so they don't have even a preconceived notion of what the disease is that my kids have. But in your case, you're starting, I presume, at a deficit. And by the way, I don't pretend to know this. This is just kind of my observation. And so this is what Hollywood tells us and what the TV networks tells us that narcolepsy is. And we, from what I've learned this morning and from meeting and talking with some of you, these are extreme examples and in many cases many humorous examples. And I don't mean to offend by showing this, but this is the reality probably of where you're starting, particularly when you're speaking to a stranger or somebody that doesn't know the disease or doesn't know you. So we need to keep that in mind as we're explaining this to people. And what you probably want people to know about narcolepsy is it's about people. It's complicated. It's a disease. It's a condition. It has its own uniqueness. It's serious. And more important, it's all about you. You are a regular person just like the rest of us. We all carry bad genes. We all carry a little bit of some kinds of unique characteristics. That's what makes us unique. And in your case, narcolepsy is one of those. But you're, for the most part, just like all of the rest of us. And you need to keep that in mind as well, that your rare disease, my kid's rare disease, while it's unique, doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. Now, it creates interesting circumstances. It may create challenges at some times, and that's part of what we're going to talk about here today. So what's an elevator speech? Probably the wrong name for a session like this. As I was thinking about it, it's like, well, how does that attract people to the session? But it comes from this idea that when you jump in an elevator with somebody, you've got 20 or 30 seconds to get their attention. You say hi, you say good morning, much like I did when I walked in here, good afternoon, who brought the good weather? And then you probably want to share something with them, and you're introducing yourself or whatever. You've got 20 or 30 seconds to do that. Hopefully the building's really tall, you've got a little extra time, but it may not be. It may only be 3 stories long, or you're going up the escalator to the main floor here. An elevator speech is clear, concise, understandable. Most importantly, it's engaging. And if we think about how we share, and I have the same challenge when I meet people as well and I've got my daughter with me, is how to engage people in my disease or my condition. What do I want from them? What do they want from me? What are they thinking? What are their preconceptions and so on? And as I mentioned, brief, but it doesn't mean your conversation can't carry on and on and on. It just means that the introductory part of that conversation, the part about sharing a little bit and then querying them or giving them an opportunity to respond back to you so you know what they're hearing and what they're thinking, that needs to be fairly brief. So I'm going to cheat a little bit as I give you part one of my elevator pitch. I'm going to show you some pictures. So these are my two daughters. Two of my three daughters have a disease called metachromatic leukodystrophy, MLD for short. It's a rare, genetic, terminal, neurometabolic disease. You're like, okay, now my eyes are glazing over already. We'll talk about that in a minute. My youngest daughter, actually we diagnosed the disease in my oldest daughter after a 6-year diagnostic odyssey. Once she was diagnosed, she wasn't eligible for therapy. My youngest daughter, age 10 at the time, was eligible for therapy, a bone marrow transplant, or before we had stem cell transplants. And she passed away as complications to that disease. So I've got one daughter with the disease, one daughter I've lost from the disease. And Lindy, they told us, who was 14 at the time, that she would live for another 4, 5, 6 years until she was 20. We just celebrated her 37th birthday last month. So that's me in a nutshell. That's my family. And I'll tell you a little bit about my organization and that in part 2 of the elevator pitch. So I want to ask you, just very, very quickly, we'll just leave that there, that's the next slide. So how many kids do I have? 2 of my 3 have MLD. Okay, and how many of them are alive? Well, I didn't tell you about the third one, but so 2 of my 3 are alive. And does anybody remember what MLD stands for? But you know what? That's okay. That's perfectly okay, because I don't expect you to remember that it's metachromatic leukodystrophy, because that doesn't mean anything to you, right? So that's not, from my perspective, I don't want you to remember the name. I want you to actually, maybe in this case, I was talking about my family, remember a little bit about my family. And I talked about a daughter that passed away, very sad for us. That probably touches a little bit of a nerve with you as well, then that's an opportunity then to talk. And if we were being really interactive right now, one of you might have said, as we're going from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor to the 1st floor, you might have said, well, that's 2 of your 3 kids, well, how about the 3rd one? And I would then respond back and say, hey, she doesn't have the genetics for the disease, she's free of it, can't pass it on to our grandkids, and that's what we're doing. So the point is that even though I made a very, very short introduction to me, in this case about my family, I didn't expect that you would retain everything. But I was also a little bit careful about what I shared. I didn't tell you what gene it was. I didn't tell you what the scientific name was. I gave the name of the disease, but not the really scientific name and those sorts of things. Because, while that's interesting to me, you have no basis to understand that, unless maybe you're a doctor or a researcher and you're in that space, you can have a different conversation. But so it's really important to just kind of think a little bit about where you are and what it is you're trying to share. And that brings us to the next point here, which is to share smartly. It's kind of the standard stuff, kind of our high school English as you're writing a news article or something like that. Who, what, where, when, and why. Who are you sharing to? What are you sharing? Why? What are the circumstances of that? We're talking about an elevator pitch, but it could be you're sitting out getting a cup of tea, or you're at the airport leaving the conference tomorrow or the next day. Those sorts of things. So we're going to go through that in just a little bit more detail. But I do want to bring up 2 things that come under share smartly. One is leave time to interact. Don't take that whole elevator ride and talk only about you. Check in with people. Kind of give them a little bit, allow them to respond. Guess what? They may have narcolepsy too. Or they may have, like me, a similar rare disease story that is parallel. So at least I can relate because we both share rare diseases in common. So share smartly by leaving some time to interact. And these kids down here, sorry, a little small, they don't have narcolepsy. They're just bored. We didn't get their attention, right? So the other thing is, as you're talking to somebody, I think this is kind of how we take conversation normally, is that we don't overwhelm them. we share something that's engaging, and that's part of that giving them time to speak back to you and tell you what they're hearing or what they're most interested in, or learn a little bit about them as well. So we don't want to bore our audience as well. Now, you're in here to learn about preparing an elevator speech. And I'm going to tell you that a little bit of preparation, and that's probably too formal of a word, a little bit of preparation is a good thing. To be intentional about what you're sharing when you're sharing with somebody. And you probably do this naturally anyhow. I think we all do this as part of conversation. When I checked in as a speaker, I didn't know any of the staff here with the Narcolepsy Network. And so I was intentional about how I introduced myself, what I asked of them. I need to know where the room was. I want to make sure the times were still the same. So I was kind of mechanical about some of those things. But then we talked just very, very briefly at check-in, just a little bit about the conference and kind of got familiar and that sort of thing. So we are naturally kind of intentional about how we speak with people. And what I don't want you to do is walk out of this room and say, I've got to go write a paragraph that is my elevator speech, and I'm going to recite it word for word every time I see something. Because that's not natural. And I promise you'll end up looking like whoever's in that elevator with you will end up looking like that. So, but I want you to think a little bit about what it is you're sharing and why you're sharing. So who is your audience? Oftentimes, that audience might be a medical team. It could be coworkers from work, the boss. Could be your family. Could be just a more casual gathering of neighbors or coworkers or something. Each one of these audiences would want to hear something slightly different from you, right? What you would share with your family is probably a little different than what you would share with your boss, or at least the first time you share with your boss. And same thing if it was a doctor. You would talk in about a whole bunch of other things with your doctor than you would perhaps with coworkers. So it's important to keep your audience in mind. And I brought the kids back in, and I don't mean to insult anybody, but I'm going to just label them the general public. So when you run into somebody in the general public and you're just talking casually, or perhaps you're having something that they could observe as the effects of the narcolepsy. Is it catalepsy? Is that what you said?
Cataplexy.
Cataplexy. See? I admit what I don't know, but here we are, going back and forth. So maybe they see something going on and they don't quite understand. You've recovered and now you need to share something. Or maybe you're trying to, I don't know, you're preparing to go on a hike with somebody. You just want to say, if such and such happens, this is what you need to know. So be intentional, but remember the general public, remember Hollywood, they're going to come in with some preconceived notions as to what all of this is. So be careful and just be thoughtful of that. Be respectful. They were taught what they were taught. You can't change that where they come from. You can change what it is that they take away from a conversation. What do you want them to know? Something personal? Is this something about the science? You're at a conference here, you're probably sharing a little bit about medications or the impact of the condition on you. The personal impact, what does this mean to you in terms of how you plan your daily life, or how you're going to take a vacation, what job you're going to take, whatever that may be. And likely how your narcolepsy might, or most often, might not, and this is the part where you're teaching them something, it's not going to affect them. They're probably not going to notice, or guess what? You know, I have a few quirks, and I've been known to misbehave right in public as well. So if something happens, it's not a big deal. Something happens to all of us. Clearly, if it's serious medical or whatever, you need to alert them to that. Then fine, you need to take the time to do that. But I think the important part of this is that if somebody knows at the right level, they're not going to panic, and obviously that puts you and them both at ease. Where and when? Basically, when you have their attention. It doesn't always have to be a captive audience inside a box we call an elevator or on the escalator together. And when they can retain what you share. So if you're just passing and you only have a moment, and we do this in our regular conversation, we don't share a lot if we're just kind of passing in the halls or in the supermarket or wherever that may be. And then, of course, acknowledge that you need to share openly when you can. So you might, as I mentioned before, you may share differently and perhaps less comprehensively with your boss, particularly a new boss or a new job or in a new social situation or whatever that may be, than you would in some other environment with people you've known for a long, long time. So I do respect that this conversation is probably interactive and occurs over time in a lot of circumstances, and probably there are times when you just can't share much at all because that will have a negative impact on you for some reason. Don't worry about that. Again, we do that all as part of daily life. And then think about why you want them to know. the who, what, where, and now talking about the why. To understand you, to understand the condition, or maybe to know how to react if something might happen that they might be either observing or need to be a party to. And I think it's really important here to think particularly about the condition. You are experts in your disease, in your condition. And it's very, very easy for you to share and to overwhelm. I can go into the ARSA-A enzyme and the CNS implications of that and blood-brain barriers, all those sorts of things about my disease that will completely overwhelm, well, I don't know who's in the audience, but presumably most of you would overwhelm you. And you can do exactly the same thing with your disease. And guess what? We're talking the same language. We're just using kind of different words to get at it. So I caution you that at the condition level, that you do want people to know your disease. You want to know the condition, but be careful and spoon feed them at a rate that they can comprehend that. You can always come back either in response to a question or the next time you see them and share additional information. Leave time for them to interact. And I think I've said this a couple of times already now. But it's respectful to have a conversation that goes both ways. It's informative. We learn a little more about each other. We become a little more personally connected. And that's important, particularly when you have the next conversation with them. You probably have something you want them to know, but guess what? There's probably something different that they want to know. Or at least they think they want to know. And when you tell them something, they'll think something different, then spawn back and so on. Again, this is how we do normal conversation, but I'm just asking you to be a little bit intentional about that. Every audience cares, but more importantly, hears something different. When you say something about the genetic or the virus basis of the disease, we were talking about that this morning. Your keynote was talking about that. It's like, oh, we think virus is cool. Are you contagious? No, you're not contagious. But guess what? Folks don't know that. As soon as you say virus, we use a virus as one of the therapies for our disease too. It's not contagious. But they don't know that when you say that. So you need to be a little bit careful about what they're going to hear. And as we mentioned, interest them, don't overload them, and give them a chance to react to what you're saying. So I want to share just a very, very brief story. You are not in the next session. One of these next door is talking about how to influence people in Washington, D.C. with policy. And this is a great place where the elevator speech works, and that's probably why they invited me to speak about that, because I do a lot of work in Washington, D.C. This is a picture of Representative Riker from the state of Washington, our northern neighbors here, and this is actually the Senate, or the House of Representatives, their private elevator in Washington, D.C. We had just had a meeting. This is a group of us from Oregon and Washington. We just had, and this is the senator here, or the representative. I'm an Oregonian, so I don't know this guy, so I apologize. But we had a meeting with some of his staff. We talked about rare diseases, and rare disease. This is Rare Disease Day, which is February 29th, if you didn't know that, or February 28th in those non-rare days, non-rare years. We just had a meeting with some of his staff, and the meeting did not go well. And we left out the front door of his office. He comes out of the back door, and this lady here is from the state of Washington, and she recognized him, and she says, "Hi, Representative." Of course, he didn't recognize her, but in Washington, D.C., everybody's your friend, so he was very kind to her. And we're walking around the corner, not too far, just probably about as far as that door, to get to the elevator. And they have 4 or 5 elevators for the general public, and then they have the special express elevator for the senators and representatives, so they get down to vote or do whatever it is they do. And I just said, the meeting didn't really go very well. The aide there was a lady, said she just didn't quite connect, and I'm not sure we were able to share. He says, well, great, or not great, but he says, well, tell me about that. And so we're now in front of the elevator, and the sign says members only on his elevator, and we think he's going to go there, and we're going to go here, and that really wasn't enough time for us to share anything. But he says, come on and jump in the elevator with us. And sure enough, we got our 15 or 20 seconds with him, and I just had to, because I'm a leader back there with some of these groups. I just said, wait, stand in the elevator. I want to take your picture. And so we took a picture of him in the elevator. But these things do happen in elevators every once in a while. But again, you have to be prepared. What we could say to the representative, much like you would say to somebody at the front desk up here, or with the airline, when you get on the airline, you don't have much time. And so you need to think a little bit about what's really important. What do you want them to walk away with? And that led to some interesting follow-up conversations as well, just not in the elevator. So let's talk about my elevator speech. I am now going to give you part 2 of my elevator speech. And if I had time, I want to say all of this to you. And guess what? That's too much. Because by the time I said all of this, you'd be tuned out, or you'd be overwhelmed, or you'd be stuck at the top or the bottom or something and say, oh, I'm interested in newborn screening, I'm interested in what it's like to be president of an organization. So this, and I put this up here because normally I would verbalize this, but I want you to kind of see this as well. That looks like a lot of words, but guess what? For me to say that is probably 20 seconds or so. I'm co-founder and president of MLD Foundation. We serve families around the world with a rare terminal genetic neurometabolic. You heard that before, right? So I'm kind of consistent with that. Disease called metachromatic leukodystrophy. MLD, like narcolepsy, is a rare disease. So what did I do? I just made that something that we can connect on. Even if you didn't catch the rest of that, it's like, oh, we're a rare disease too. So there's something in common with this guy here. 2 of my 3 children have MLD. Darcy passed away at 10 in 95, and then he turned 37, doing much better than expected. Guess what? They said she would die by 20. That just says the basic science isn't well understood for our disease. And now we've connected again, right? Because I think that's, at least from what I heard this morning, kind of similar with you. So I've added that in, the rare disease, but guess what? I just, on the fly here, said I'm going to add something in else, or something else in where we can connect. With MLD, I'm going to tell you about the disease, but in 10 words. With MLD, the myelin sheath, there goes my hand, right, is the insulator on the nerves, kind of like an extension cord, and it disintegrates. So like an extension cord, things would short out if there was no insulator. Same thing happens in MLD. The signals can't get around in the brain, or they can't get from the brain to the muscles. My daughter has great muscles, but she can't control them very well. So I made that really simple in terms that I hope that you would understand. Now we could be much more scientific about that, but I think you could walk away from this and say, oh, I kind of understand. It's different than narcolepsy, but maybe you can imagine that we might have some similar problems in certain circumstances, right? So I've simplified this up, and again, I will add and subtract, but I've got a couple of things. This rare terminal genetic neurometabolic condition is something I'm pretty consistent about, but the rest of it can ebb and flow. It kind of just depends on the audience. If you were here with kids, I'd probably, much like I did in the beginning, I started with some photos. If I had my daughter here, then obviously we'd have a different connection about that as well. So be thinking about that. In my briefcase of ammunition or of other things I can say is like, oh my goodness, I do a lot of stuff back in Washington, D.C. If we were in a political environment. I do newborn screening, I'm involved with policy. We can go into a lot of different things that I do with the NIH and the FDA and those sorts of things. But guess what? That's way too much for us to just do in just a moment. But if we're going to have coffee afterwards, I might tell you about some of that. I might ask you about that as well, and how you're involved for narcolepsy. So with that, I've kind of given you the formal part, and I want to take the next 20 minutes or so, and I want you to share a little bit about you. So who wants to be the brave first person here to give a quick elevator speech about yourself or your family? You're smiling. You do it for us? And you probably don't want to use your last name because they are recording, but so we just met, and your name is?
Nicole.
Nicole.
Yes, nice to meet you. Well, I am a billing specialist, and I'm pretty much a newlywed. One interesting thing about me is that I do have narcolepsy. It is a rare sleep condition. It's also technically a neurological disorder. It's quite similar in symptoms to things like sleep apnea, but it is also really unique in a lot of aspects. I have it pretty under control for the day-to-day, but basically my brain's not so great at controlling when I'm awake and when I'm asleep.
Okay, great. So you said you're a billing specialist.
I am.
So it seems like you're probably managing the disease fairly well so that you can keep that kind of a job and a husband to boot, so. Excellent, excellent. So she did really well. That was pretty simple terms in how, and Nicole, right?
Yeah.
How Nicole described that. She gave a little bit about the disease, a little bit about a personal connection. There's some things that we could go and continue to talk about there. And again, not too long, because not too long is good. So thank you. Congratulations on being a newlywed.
Thank you.
Who wants to go next? We got plenty of time. I may make it all the way around. Any brave souls? You want to go? You're smiling. We're all friends here.
Hello, my name is Pamela, and I'm a physician. I am a psychiatrist. I was diagnosed with narcolepsy, which, as we know, is a REM disorder, not just falling asleep in your suit. I was diagnosed at age 60, which was quite unusual. So I've had it now for 14 years, but I'm very well controlled on an excellent medication, and I can still work full time.
Excellent. So other than sharing your age, you did the math. No, wonderful. And you did use the word REM. I think a lot of people would recognize that, but that's another thing that somebody could ask you about and engage in obviously the same circumstance where, wow, you have a pretty intense job. And my perception of your words, falling asleep in your suit, is like, oh, wait a minute, maybe this narcolepsy is not what I thought it was. Maybe it's more complicated, or it's more subtle, or whatever the case may be. So great, good job, good job. Who's next? Don't be brave, I'm gonna come on this side of the room. Don't make me pick you.
I'll read something.
You'll read something? Okay, we'll put it on the microphone so everybody can hear it. Excuse me.
Yeah. Okay, I was diagnosed at 24 with narcolepsy with cataplexy. I'm now 44, and Portland will be my 13th conference I've attended. I'm on a large amount of stimulants that allows me to function and drive. I have a 10-year-old girl, a 9-year-old boy, and a wonderfully supportive boyfriend. I've been through a lot with narcolepsy and feel like a better, stronger person for it. PD is wasted on me because I'm living with narcolepsy, not dying from it. I still have good and bad days, but as long as I still have days, I'll take it.
Awesome. Excellent. And your name is? Melinda. Excellent. Very nice. I love how you spell that. So, why did you read instead of just share?
Because I would forget what I was going to say in order, and this I would forget if I'm reading it.
So we did. We all heard everything you said there, but what was kind of your general reaction? Did you know she was reading that? I could tell, right? I mean, that's good on Facebook or it's kind of that environment. But I don't think there was anything in there that you don't have in your heart, right? And I don't care what order comes out in. And in fact, if you pause or you hesitate, I'm just going to ask you something anyhow, right? So I would encourage you to, while that's good, and I love what she did in terms of kind of planning that, thinking that through, much like I did, 2 or 3 paragraphs, a little bit about me, my family, in this case my family, because I'm not the patient.
This is my baby steps. Start with this and then
Perfect.
go independent.
So what I want to say is what you did was excellent. Now just get comfortable with it, right? As you share it with people, we don't care that you tell the story, because what we're most interested in is you, and learning about you and connecting with you personally. Okay? Awesome. Awesome.
Oh,
Good turn.
I have a picture with the record too.
Oh, you do?
Because I'm from Seattle.
Excellent. Excellent. Was he a good guy?
Oh yeah.
Hello?
Oh, he's caught the criminal killer.
Oh, there you go.
His task force.
Excellent. Excellent. Who's next? Get your hands up. Okay, sorry. My kids are all grown, so I don't have eyes in the back of my head anymore.
So my name is Rebecca. Can I do a sample pitch to coworkers?
Sure, sure.
Because I actually had to do this recently. So we're working together for a while, and there's no non-awkward time to bring this up, but I have a condition called narcolepsy. It's a rare neurological disorder that can be managed, but at this point there's no cure. So what that means for me in the workplace is that sometimes I might seem a little out of it, and it gets hard for me to put sentences together, and I call that a brain fog. I can't control when I fall asleep, and so that happens a couple times during the workday. If you can't find me, I might be napping because I need to reboot my system. Other than that, it shouldn't affect much. Yeah, and thank you for understanding and supporting me in this.
So, Rebecca, I hadn't even noticed that. You know, I noticed that sometimes, I thought you just went to the restroom or somewhere, but I hadn't even noticed that. Is narcolepsy, is it really serious, or how does that?
So it's a range. Mine isn't that bad. Some people have really bad cataplexy where they get muscle paralysis, but mine has been more manageable.
And is that the people that fall asleep in their sleep? See, that's the only thing I can say now, because I don't want to make anything up.
So I'd say that's the more extreme range of things. Mainly it's when they experience a strong emotion, they lose muscle tone.
Okay, and you don't have that problem, so we don't need to do anything special for you, or how can we support you?
I have a light version of narcolepsy, so sometimes if I'm walking a little funny, it's because my knees aren't holding very well.
Okay. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for responding to me. That was awesome, right? I think that was appropriate. You didn't share too much. You shared a little bit more when I asked, and it's very brave. Obviously, probably some circumstances, but maybe both personal as well as business encouraged you to share that. But that's awesome. So very good. Thank you. Who's next?
Could I say something else?
Sure.
One of the things in terms of talking with people about what narcolepsy is, I ask them to think about what they're observing when they see their cat or their dog twitching in their sleep. Because I have cataplexy, and during the cataplectic episodes, I'm paralyzed, and that's exactly what's happening to their dog and cat. They can't run, so they whine and they twitch.
Okay.
And it's really a good illustration because I think people grasp it quite quickly.
Very good. And I think those kinds of examples are really powerful, partially because it takes away maybe a little bit of the tension of me hearing from you, because it's like, I'm still trying to grasp this. Should I be afraid? Should I not? What does this really mean to me? And now we're talking about a cat. So this is kind of a little bit of an arm's length circumstance. So it's not only a great illustration, but it takes a little bit of the pressure and tension out of the situation too. Who else? Maybe somebody else has had an interesting situation where you had to share about your narcolepsy, as you said, in work or maybe in a different environment.
My name is Kathy Galloway. This is my daughter Nicole, and we at one time having Thanksgiving dinner, and we had all the family at the house, and we're all sitting at the dining room table, and Nicole had one of her narcolepsy attacks and was sleeping at the table, and everybody was aware that she had narcolepsy, but they'd never seen her actually go to sleep. So I have one sister-in-law that likes to talk a lot, and she right away started saying, "Oh, what's going on? Why is she doing that? What?" She started going off the wall about it, and I'm like, "Mary, first of all, I want to let you know she can hear everything you're saying, and yes, this is narcolepsy." And then I went further to explain, a little bit about it, and then slowly she came awake and was able to tell about it herself. So.
Yeah, and part of that probably, again, not knowing your sister-in-law, but she's probably nervous, doesn't know what to say, how to react, and those sorts of things. So some of that just kind of, when we're in those circumstances, we, the recipient or the observer, we don't know.
Right.
We have the same, I shouldn't say same, we have equal tension with our disease. My daughter's prone to seizures, and that doesn't slow us down a bit. She's had seizures. I mean, I could go down through the list of places with seizures. And our biggest challenge, and my wife and I kind of figured this out, our biggest challenge is when she has a seizure, and she's in a wheelchair now, but at the time she wasn't in a wheelchair, and so we end up on the floor. It's like, don't call 911. We may need that, but not just yet. Because and again, I don't know all of your circumstances, but when the fire department shows up, the manager of the store comes running down, and it's like, I don't need all of that stuff going on. We're going to be fine in 5 or 10 minutes. And the same thing where you wake up, she can recover from her seizure and so on. So, again, thinking about why the other person's reacting the way they are and trying to diffuse that is good. And while it's not funny to say that she can hear everything, it's like, oh, that's like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, wait a minute, take a deep breath, chill out, and so on. So very good. Who else? Come on, I'm sure you've had all kinds of interesting experiences and challenges. Okay.
I have to say I have an issue about being filmed, so.
Yep, no worries. No worries.
I am a grandmother and a social worker. And my grandson is just turning 14 in December. Last year we had a heck of a year, school year. The teachers were calling him lazy. They said he was acting out, he was falling asleep in school. And thank God he's got a good mother who's ferocious, and she kept pushing and taking him to the doctor. And it took, I think, only 3 visits to get him diagnosed with narcolepsy. So now what I'm doing with my colleagues is telling my story and telling his story. Because I think there's so many young people that I came across as a social worker who were labeled lazy, dysfunctional, who probably had narcolepsy. And so now what I'm trying to do is educate my peers and say to them, before you label this kid and make him ADD, send him for neurological testing. And my friends look at me kind of funny, but they trust me, I have respect in the community. And I'm hoping that by coming here, I've learned an awful lot, that I'll take it back to New York City and make a difference, at least in my community.
Great, great. Thank you for that. So I took some notes out of the keynote this morning. It said daydreaming, insomnia, drug abuse, depression, bipolar disorder, apathy, ADD, and seizures are the misdiagnosis. So you can imagine what other people who are not, I mean, we're not doctors, some of us aren't, but most of us aren't, but we're diagnosing, right? We're making kind of those judgment calls as to, not judgment calls, but observations about what's going on around us. And so you can be really, really helpful as you share that.
Now that he's been diagnosed and he's on Xyro, I mean, I know that some of you don't believe in it, but the doctor was so upset when he saw how serious his condition was. It's a different child. He's now in high school. We don't fight with him in the morning to go to school. We fought with him to come here. But just now, he just came out of a West session, and his mother said he was skipping. He went off with the other kids. So I think it's just so important to change children's lives around them, right? So it works.
Right. Great. Great. I'm glad that's working for you. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I have no idea what that therapy is. So one of the other things I just want to build off of that is you're saying you're now educating the people around you and in your peer community. But being proactive with people, while it's risky, because remember, there's times you don't want to share or you only want to share a little bit. But being a little proactive, particularly probably in the school situation, or where you, on behalf of a child in some other situation, you can say, hey, I just need you to be aware of this. So that if something comes up, you don't have to tell much about it, but if something comes up, then you can contact me. So that is another form of this elevator speech, knowing how much to share and when. And you'll get another chance and another chance, you know, maybe in a review or some kind of conference or something like that. It's a job.
I'm Hannah. I have narcolepsy. I've had it for a year and a half, and I just want to say I think I've had some trouble with oversharing and like sharing too much and overwhelming the people around me because I get really excited like that someone takes an interest in it. And I'm like, yes, someone will listen. But then I say a bunch of words and they're like, what? I don't know. Do you have any tips for trying to slow yourself down and not just fall over them with words?
Sure, and so that's why I'm saying being a little intentional about what you share. So, you know, if you pause or just think for a moment, says, why do I want them to know this? Not so much what you want to know, but why do you want to know? In some cases, it's what you want them to do with that information. And so if you're, you're trying to just be social and interactive with somebody, then your end goal is different than if you're in with your doctor or something like that. So just go a little slow. You probably don't want to hear somebody's entire life story when you first meet them either, right? I tell you about, I don't know, when I was your age, you don't want to hear that right now, or ever probably. but just pause for a moment, and they will react not so much to the narcolepsy, they're going to react to you. And the narcolepsy is part of you, but it's only a portion of you as well. So just kind of put it in that context that, and I think we all want to do that, right? I love NASCAR. So if I find one of you here has got a bumper sticker on the back of your car or whatever it is, I'm going to bring that up. I'm up here in Oregon. I have a USC bumper sticker on the back of my car. People don't want to hear about that, so I'm a little bit careful about where my sports interests go. So again, just pause for a second and think about not so much why are you sharing, but what do you want them to do, and that might slow you down just a little bit. But again, I think erring on the side of sharing a little bit, but keep watching and seeing what the reaction is probably better than undersharing, right? Because it develops trust in conversation. So, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Clea. Sorry I was late, but I just wanted to respond to your question. Because I've also had that experience of, especially I've been sort of diagnosed for 6 years, and especially at first, and I had done a lot of research about the science, and I was really interested in it. And what's been helpful for me is to sort of approach my language around what I want people to understand about my experience, or for them to understand my choices around my lifestyle, like with friends. Like I'll choose not to stay up late, for example, or to, and to explain that, I say like, it's like sort of a narcolepsy thing. Like I'm sensitive to external dysregulation, so I think it's a symptom of the syndrome, and I might not share that with them, but just they don't really need to know that. It's more like, here's to like understand that like when I go to bed early or when I leave early, it's not like because of you or because how I'm feeling about like the situation. It's purely like a self-care thing for me. That's different than maybe other people who don't have narcolepsy, or it's, in the context of my narcolepsy self-care. And same with like falling asleep, like saying that, there are times when I get like sleepy and it's triggered by certain things like after I eat or being in dark, warm places like a movie theater or something like that. And it's not about me being like bored or like something I did that made me sleepy. It's just a part of the narcolepsy, and I find that has been helpful for me to share, be more vocal about narcolepsy, and also just like the time it takes, like for me to like understand how my own outside of the like scientific criteria or symptoms about narcolepsy, like how I like navigate to manage it, and expressing that has been helpful, and people seem to be more receptive to that. So.
Excellent. And so you're being sensitive to those that are around you, not only about you and what you need, but also about maybe what they can handle, what they can deal with, and say, hey, it's not about you. I need to go to bed early or whatever it may be. So great. That's great.
I do like to over-explain.
Okay.
And
so Keith.
I'm Keith.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about yourself and your narcolepsy.
I came down with narcolepsy when I was 39. I'd never had anything before. It was an allergy that I had. And I've had it for 15 years now, and I've had it at work and stuff. So I go on a lot more than that and things. But I've tried to learn from my kids and my wife that when they give it, it's real short and sweet, and people sort of understand. And then if they want to, I actually hope that my wife and my kids jump in and explain it for me, because then if they have questions, I'll jump in, because it's short and sweet, and they can relate to it more coming from someone else than me.
Right. Well, so there's a good strategy that you're a little intentional about. But guess what? Probably what they're saying is, you're still dad, you're still husband,
Right.
And this is how this is impacting us, or what this means, and then you'll jump in on that.
Right, because they know that I like to over-explain it and lose the person.
Right. So what was interesting is I kind of baited you a little bit, right? I said, so tell me about your narcolepsy, and you got 2 or 3 sentences in, and you said, but I could tell you a lot more, right? So that's what I would encourage you to just be a little more thoughtful about, and listen to how your wife or your kids explain this. It's really difficult for me to make stuff short. They say you got 200 words to put a bio together. And I'm not one of these long bio guys, but there's so many things I want you to know about. And so Even just being aware of that, I think, is awesome. That's awesome. Who else?
I think we have just very little time left.
Okay.
So, maybe 4.
Okay.
Maybe one more question.
Sure. Anybody else questions or want to share a little bit? We'll...
Something interesting, when you spoke about your grandson being diagnosed, one of the most fascinating people I think I've ever met at one of these conferences was a woman who was in her late 70s, and she had grown up in a real backwater in Alabama, where she went to a one-room school where they had all the grades, and her teacher could not have known anything about narcolepsy, but she recognized that this child was sleeping. And she would put her down in the cloakroom on a little bed she made for her whenever she saw the child getting sleepy. And when she woke up after an hour or so, she would teach her what she missed. And she finished that school, learned how to use the naps to keep herself awake, and she eventually finished a doctorate in chemistry and was working as a chemist at 70 years.
So that's an inspiring story. I want to put that in a little bit practical terms, which is be positive about the struggles you have. And as you're positive and comfortable with that, either in how you say it or how you live through that, others build comfort and trust. And I would love...
That woman telling that story to so many of us
Yes.
was really an inspiring thing, because she started out with so little, but it took one person to recognize that she needed just a little help.
Yeah, excellent. So we're just about out of time. I did want to share one thing that I picked up this morning. Now, for me, I'm an outsider to your community. We're in a rare disease community together, but I'm an outsider to narcolepsy. And the description of what narcolepsy is it says it's a lifelong neurological sleep disorder characterized by the disruption of the boundaries between sleep and wake states. That's a little scientific, but you know what? That took me a long ways away from falling asleep in your suit, as you say. And thinking, oh, what do you mean this is an awake thing? What do you mean this boundary thing? It took me an entirely different space. So I just wanted to encourage you along those lines that when you're listening, even through the rest of the presentations today and tomorrow, that you listen how other people share things. They come at it from different perspectives, and you might pick up some ideas. So often we just gloss over. And you've told me your story, you've told me your story, you've told me your story, and all of a sudden we start thinking it's repetitive, but it's not, because we all come from a different perspective and we can learn from each other. So my contact information is up there if I can ever be of any help at any level. I can't do the science for your disease, I admit that. But if I can help with anything else, I do encourage you, there was a session that runs in parallel with this, but a great way to apply these skills, and you heard about this in the keynote, is to share very briefly with your senators, your congressmen, about some of their policy and some of the funding issues. And there's a little bit of an arm's length abstract way, but a good way to take something that's written and to practice a little bit, because as they hear from you, just like when I hear from you or somebody at the airport on the way home, we're all going to learn something. In their case, there's an ask. So with that, I thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of your conference.